we're hoping to show you a little bit of a trailer for The Greatest Showman in case you haven't heard of it at all. It's a fictional account of P.T. Barnum and his life. Now, let me preface again, like it's a fictional account, so if you've watched it, this is not a biography. It's definitely not going to hold any kind of mustard to anything that's out there. Matter of fact, the more research you do, the more holes that you find in the whole thing. But what we're going off of is the movie itself. So P.T. Barnum, he grows up in a poor house. Matter of fact, in the movie, he's going with his dad, who is a tailor, to a rich person's house. And he kind of makes eye contact with the rich person's daughter. And as he's making her laugh, he ends up getting in trouble for it. Actually, the guy slaps him. He's mistreated for being poor. And I know that that's nothing that's like too uncommon, right? Because that happens still today. It happens right here in Columbus. It happens all around the world in all sorts of different cultures that sometimes based upon your economic status, you're treated differently. And so P.T. Barnum he's locked into that kind of world. But he is a dreamer. Like his eyes are always looking towards like some far off galaxy, something grand that he can create. He actually says in the song called "A Million Dreams," because every night I lie in bed, the brightest colors fill my head. A million dreams are keeping me awake. I think of what the world could be, a vision of the one that I see. A million dreams is all it's going to take. A million dreams for the world that we're going to make. And sometimes whenever you grow up not having much, like the grand visions that you have are pretty substantial. Sometimes not having some of the toys and some of the tools available to you, you become pretty resourceful and inventive about some of the things that you're doing. And so he was dreaming about all of the great things he could do. And the first time they sing this song, it's when he's there with his girl. He finally wins the girl. Like he goes off, he gets enough stuff so that they can have a meager beginning to their marriage. And so he goes to work and he's working hard at this dream, right? That one day he's going to be able to provide for her the same way that her parents provided for her, and that he was not going to be a laughing stock anymore. He was going to be able to stand up against all of this. But he loses his job. It's a pretty crushing blow to his dreams. But he was kind of a conniver, right? And so the ship that sunk that ended up costing him his job, he took the paperwork for those ships to the bank and got a $10,000 loan, right? On something that he didn't own, something that was at the bottom of the sea. To start a museum of all things. Like of all the things that he could buy, he has this museum and he brings in all of these interesting articles from different places at different times, but it's really a pretty slow go. And he realizes he needs to have some live action stuff going on. There needs to be some interactive display. And as he's sitting in an office one time, he sees a little guy, right? Charles is short in stature, and his mind just kind of goes crazy. Like, if I can just find all of the strange and the odd and the weird and like find a way to bring them together, then something grand could happen. And so he goes to his house and he tries to sell him on his idea, on his grand vision. And he says this, laughing, they're already laughing at you. You might as well get paid. And how do you think Charles responded to that? Charles actually, he left the conversation and locked himself into his room. He's like, I don't need you to tell people who are laughing at me. Like, it doesn't matter how much you pay me. I don't want people laughing at me. It's not worth it. What I believe that he wanted was acceptance. Right? What he wanted was significance. How many of us, you and I, like we have these strange oddities about us, and really what we want more than anything else, more than any kind of fame or fortune, is we really want significance, right? We want to belong. We want to be accepted the way that we are. And so this is a pretty powerful thing. And so he begins to sell Charles on a different vision. The vision of being a general, leading the charge, right? That everybody's going to be flocking to see you. Now this this is a vision he can buy into. And so now P.T. Barnum, he's got a taste of what this is going to take. And so he goes off and he finds all of these different people. He puts up posters, kind of like, wanted missing dog. He's wanting people with extraordinary abilities or, some sort of weird character traits. And so he begins to collect them. And so he's got this guy with a hairy-faced dog boy. He's got a trapeze artist that's African-American. Right? He's bringing in a very large guy, a very tall guy, but he goes to find this bearded woman. Right? And she doesn't want to be seen. She's hiding behind the clothing that she's doing, the laundry. And so when he sees her, he's like, "Oh, this is magnificent. This is awesome." And to which he starts singing this song. If you don't know me, I'm not a huge fan of musicals. Music kind of interrupts my movie. But I think there are some pretty powerful lyrics throughout this one. If you pause and you focus in on the lyrics, I think that it scratches an itch in the human soul. Probably most of us can identify with. "I see it in your eyes. You believe that lie. That you need to hide your face, afraid to step outside. So you lock the door. But don't you stay that way. No more living in the shadows. You and me know how that goes, because once you see it, you will never, never be the same." Right? You're trying to lock yourself away. You don't want anybody to see that stuff, that thing that's in your life. Now, what is it? Probably not too many of us face the kind of things that we see in this movie. We don't have this extraordinary amount of hair all over our body. We don't have a bearded woman among us, unless maybe you're treating that with something. Maybe there's some sort of procedure, like the tattooed man. We've got a couple of those guys around, maybe, but apart from that, these are some pretty big things. But in our lives, what is it? What kind of struggle have we faced? What kind of baggage do we bring into the relationship? How many different relationships have we had? How many of those have failed? And how much of our identity is tied to those failed relationships? How many of us have been abused or neglected in a certain way, and our identity comes from that abuse and that neglect? We've never been encouraged or supported, and so we hide back in the shadows. We're afraid to step outside. We want to just lock it away. But how does that go? I'll tell you how it goes. Satan likes to get us alone, locked away and isolated. And it's there he just entraps us in our own minds and our own thoughts. And we get to thinking things like, I'm never going to be good enough. Nobody's ever going to accept me. How am I ever going to be this way? And while we're there, all alone, trapped with our negativity, he's kicking us, he's beating us, and we are losing this fight, and we're getting depressed, and it's not good. And so we need to step out into the light, and this is what he's challenging each of these unique individuals to do. And so as he begins to develop his circus freaks, if you will, he draws a crowd. People are coming in. They're wanting to see what's going down, and this is going really well. Matter of fact, he takes some of the money that he's earned and he goes off and he buys a very, very nice house in the neighborhood of his in-laws because he feels like he needs to impress the rich people. Right? The reality is he's battling his own insecurities, his own quest for significance in that whole process. And his wife, guess what? She loved him long before he had any money, long before he had any fame. But he kind of loses track of that in hopes of impressing other people. There's one critic that actually comes to his shows, and he says this: "Does it bother you that that everyone you're selling is a fake? Everything that's going on, it's a mirage, it's a fantasy. Like you've taken it to the nines and you've put it on display, but it's hollow." Well, he keeps on doing what he's doing. He recruits this rich promoter that's being a playwright, and so he ends up taking him overseas into the presence of the queen, where they do this grand display. But there he hears of this famous singer. And without even hearing a note, he invites her to come back to America because she's already famous in Europe, and now he wants to make her famous worldwide. He promises her huge fame, huge fortune, and she comes back, and now he's got a real act to his show. Right? And so all of his time and his attention goes into this one person instead of to the rest of the group. And how do you suppose they were feeling? Pretty neglected. Pretty well on the outside, because the whole time he's pursuing his own significance in the process. Well, he gets wrapped up into it pretty deep, pretty bad. And so he decides he's going to go home. And at that moment, that singer, she pulls the plug on the whole thing, and he loses big time money. And just as he's getting to town, his museum building, it collapses in a fire. He's got nothing. Right? His wife she's pretty distraught. She's seen this article in a paper that maybe there might have been a fling, and there wasn't a fling. And so she's going to leave. But it has more to do with the fact that he actually went and got another loan for this whole tour based upon the house as a lien. And she's like, I didn't care about your fantasies, your dreams. Like, I just want to be a part of them. Just include me in what's going on. And you didn't include me. And I don't think that you're ready for that. And she says something pretty profound. When will it ever be enough for you? You don't need everyone to love you. Just a few good people. I'm willing to bet that all of us have a few good people in our life that love us exactly the way we are. Right? They embrace us, warts and all. And so many times there's other people that we're trying to satisfy. You think it doesn't happen as a pastor? You'd be wrong. Right? Because every week I'm standing before how many people? Right? I'm constantly, not just like pun intended here with the spotlight, but constantly like people are looking, and so you want to try to make everybody happy, but it's a losing battle, right? How many of us have found out it's a losing battle trying to please everyone? Right? It's just impossible. We can't do that. And so those are pretty profound. But I like the lyrics to this song. To me, this is the biggest, grandest song of them all. And maybe you're familiar with this one. Because as the circus group is kind of being shunned, they decide it's time to go out and take on their true identity. And so they have this anthem, I'm not a stranger to the dark. Hide away, they say, because we don't want your broken parts. I've learned to be ashamed of all my scars. Run away, they say. No one will love you as you are. But I won't let them break me down to dust. I know that there's a place for us, for we are glorious. And when the sharpest words want to cut me down, I'm going to send a flood, I'm going to drown them out. I am brave, I am bruised, I am who I'm meant to be. This is me. Look out, because here I come. And I'm marching on to the beat I drum. So I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies, this is me. Right? That's a profound anthem. Right? This is something that each of us, like if we'd read that and we would try to internalize that and then we would vocalize that to the outside, like this is something probably our heart is desiring to cry out. Like tired of being judged by other people and by what they think is right and what they think is wrong and how this is going to work. And this is me and this is who I'm meant to be. Right? Because God has made you the way you are. But if we're not careful, this is an anthem to proclaim our own sin nature. Right? Because each of us is born with a nature, a propensity to sin and to do the things that are wrong in the eyes of God. And if God created us, and He created us just the way we are, we understand that God doesn't make mistakes. Right? He's perfect. But at the same time, in our creation, born into a sinful world, we have a sin nature. We're destined to do certain things, to have certain desires and ambitions in life, things that are going to lead us away from God. Right? Because inside of us, we're grappled by our own temptations, our own lusts, our own desires. And we need to be able to break free of that and be who God has created us to be, not just who we are. And here's kind of my rebuttal to the big myth. Right? If you are naturally prone to murder, We don't ever say, that's cool, you can go kill whoever you want. As long as it feels good, do it. Right? We don't say that. You naturally, like you have a bent towards stealing, yeah, go take whatever you want, that's cool. Right? We don't say that. But we have a way of identifying certain sins, certain struggles, and saying, yay, this is me. You know, and if I had these kind of lustful desires as a pastor, there probably wouldn't be a shortage of people going, you know what, hey, you probably need to work on this. Right? Some of us, we would gather together because it makes us feel good to say, oh yeah, that's cool, go ahead, do it. You know, if it makes you feel good, that's all right. But we have a form of belief system, a cultural relativism that says all truth is relative. You can believe whatever you want as long as you don't hurt somebody else. Right? And a number of the religious belief systems that you can get locked into will tell you the exact same thing. Like, that's okay, you know, just worship, you know, Mother Nature, do whatever you want to do, as long as you don't hurt anybody, that's cool. Right? But that's not what God says. God says, I've got a standard for you. You see, I'm going to love you exactly as you are. I've created you with your unique personality, your unique looks, like everything that makes you you. I've given that to you, and I want you to use it because in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, it says that I have made you, I've prepared you for the good works that I want you to do. So you've got a plan, you've got a purpose, and so I want to use you. But do we believe that God loved us so much that He accepts us the way that we are, that He also is challenging us to rise above? And that's kind of where we are. Well, as P.T. Barnum he's kind of throwing his own little pity party. Just like today, he's gone to the bar. He's going to try to drink it under the table. But his group of circus people, they track him down at the bar. And they say, you gave us a chance, a place to belong. A family. These are words that I would hope that people could say about Connection Christian Church. Right? I know that you're preaching the Word of God, the truth of God, and I know that I don't always measure up, and I know that I've got some things that I need to work on, and I know that I keep falling on my face, and I'm trying to get back up, and I'm trying to get my life in gear. But at Connection, I find a place where I've been given a chance. A place where I can belong. A family. Right? So no matter whether you've been coming here, like today is the very first day here, you've been coming here for years, I hope that this is something that we've woven deep into our DNA that you can just understand and appreciate. The Connection Christian Church is going to love you exactly the way you are, no matter how messed up you are. Amen. Right? Because we're all pretty messed up. We're all pretty messed up. But we need to take a step back and take a look at some biblical truths here. In Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 4, we see a story that we embarked on a little bit last week. It's about a leprous man coming to Jesus. Matthew chapter 8, page 813 in the Bibles we provide, verses 1 through 4. It says, when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him, and behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. There's a Jewish culture scholar who says this. The disease at which we identify today as leprosy, it generally begins with pain in a certain area on your body. And that pain turns to numbness. It gets thick, it gets glossy, it gets scaly. Like it's just nasty. Like it's soreness, it's pussy, it's oozing, it's dirty, it's filthy. It's like, ugh, this is gross stuff. Right? But then all of that stuff, it begins to like make your muscle tissue weak. It begins to eat at that. Pretty soon, your face looks like that of an English bulldog. Right? It's kind of cute on a dog, not so much on a person. Right? The extremities, like fingers and toes, can actually begin to wither or even fall off. Right? This is not anything any of us would want. The word leprosy comes from a Greek word meaning sores or peeling, but it's actually anchored into a Hebrew word that actually means to have a skin disease, but it's got a deeper origin to its meaning, which means smitten, right? And those who had leprosy in the Old Testament especially, but even into the New Testament, if they had this horrible skin disease, They believed that these people were smitten by God. Right? They had done something wrong. They had transgressed. They had sinned against the law of God. And so God had punished them with this horrible disease. One scholar even said that every leper mentioned in the Old Testament was afflicted because of some sort of transgression. Matter of fact, we could go to Numbers chapter 12. And we see the story of Moses. You know, Moses and the Ten Commandments. Well, Moses wasn't alone. He had his brother Aaron, his spokesperson, and he also had his sister Miriam. And Miriam and Aaron were speaking against Moses. And God didn't like that, and so He punished them. Specifically, He punished Miriam. And why Miriam over Aaron, I don't know. But Miriam is engulfed in this cloud, and she becomes leprous, like immediately, because she has spoken out against God's servant. Aaron pleads, right, for her to be healed. But the only healing that was to come is that she had to spend 7 days outside of the camp to become clean and then to be brought back in again. In 2 Chronicles chapter 26, we see the story of King Uzziah. He was a descendant of King David. And he was doing really well at what he was doing. Right? He was leading the people. He was following God, but he got pretty cocky and pretty arrogant. And so one day he thought that he could go in and offer the incense on the altar himself. Now the law specifically forbid this to happen. It was the priest that had to do it. And so when he went in to do this, he was confronted not by one, but by 81 different priests about what he was doing. And in his arrogance, in his sin, God punished him, and he was given leprosy. Now, he repented of what was going on, but he still passed his throne on to someone else, and he spent the rest of his life living away from the people. That's a pretty big ordeal. If we go back to Numbers chapter 5, verses 1 through 4, we see just a little bit in the Old Testament of how they view people with leprosy. Page 112. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command the people of Israel that they would be put out of the camp everyone who is leprous or has a discharge, and everyone who is unclean through contact with the dead. You shall put out both male and female, putting them outside of the camp, that they may not defile their camp in the midst of which I dwell." And the people of Israel did so. And they put them outside the camp as the Lord said to Moses, so the people of Israel did it. So when they had this infectious disease, they actually removed them. They quarantined them from the rest of the people so that they wouldn't get passed around at the rest of the camp. So this is actually a very good practice, especially if you don't have the right tools to treat that specific disease. You put it off to the side by itself until that person is deemed clean enough to come back into the presence of the people. And if you go to Leviticus, just a chapter before that, there's actually 2 chapters in Leviticus, 13 and 14, that deal specifically with this kind of leprosy disease. And it describes it in kind of a gory detail. Like if you're doing this and if you're doing that, like then do this. But if you got this, then do that. And this is what you need to do to kind of treat that and to address it. And so they go through all of this thing. But what I want to draw your attention to is in chapter 13, verses 44 and 45, where it says, "The leprous person who has the disease shall wear torn clothes and let their hair of his head hang loose. And he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, 'Unclean! Unclean!' He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease, he is unclean. He shall live alone, his dwelling shall be outside of the camp." But one of the other things they say about leprosy, not only do you lose fingers and toes and things like that, but you develop this is a really raspy voice. So if you can imagine, like, "Unclean!" It's walking like a zombie, right? Torn clothes, unkept hair. Like, this is probably the picture we're getting of zombies, right? Instead of yelling brains, "Unclean! Unclean!" Like fingers, toes, like dangling. It's bad, right? But let's dig a little deeper, shall we? Because leprosy was one of those diseases of the Old Testament that foreshadowed a much deeper truth. That each of us, in the eyes of God, we are a sinner. Right? You and I, in the eyes of God are unclean. We're not worthy to be in the presence of God. And so because of our unclean nature, we have been banished and removed, and we are outside of the camp until a moment in which we can become clean. But guess what? There's no snake oil to fix this thing. Right? The reality is that we need something miraculous to take place so that we can come back into the presence of the King. And so that's what's taking place. Leviticus chapter 21 in verse 18 goes a little bit farther than just the leprosy. Leviticus 21 verse 18, page 100. For no man who has a blemish shall draw near, a man blind or lame, or one who has a a mutated face, or a limb that's too long, or a man who has an injured foot, or an injured hand, or a hunchback, or a dwarf, or a man with a defect in his sight, or an itching disease, or scabs, or crushed testicles. They really just throw it all in there. Right? So it's a pretty detailed list of different things that are wrong. And if you have any of these imperfections, then you shouldn't be in the presence of God. Wow. Anybody slightly offended at what I just read? Right? That you and I, based upon any of our imperfections, are not welcome in the presence of the King, God. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 8, shall we? Jesus he's been ushered into his kingdom, right? He's been baptized. We just talked about this, Jesus in 3D. He was baptized, he was tempted, he stood strong, he gained followers, and they went out and they began to do ministry. And amongst those opportunities coming in is a man with leprosy approaching Jesus, right? Jesus, if you can, make me clean, right? What is he desperate for? Is it fame or fortune? No. He wants significance and acceptance. Right? What you and I, when we are diseased with sin, are craving more than anything else is significance and acceptance. Right? We want to be loved by God. Because deeply inside of us, each one of us, made by God, have a spot that's special, that is just reserved for God. And God wants to be with us, and we are created in His image. And so we have to get rid of this horrible disease to approach Him. And He says, unclean, unclean, Jesus, if you can, make me clean. So Jesus could have just pushed him to the side. Right, like so many people have done. And he could have kept on walking. But what does Jesus do? Jesus does what nobody else will do. He reaches out and he touches the man. This may not seem very significant, but think about this. If you've been excommunicated from your people, you haven't had a hug in years. Nobody's given you a high five, a fist bump, or nothing. Right? And this man reaches out his hand and he touches him. And he makes him clean. But it's not just that man, right? Because Jesus, he reaches out and he touches those who are blind and he makes them see. Those who are lame and he makes them walk. Those who are deaf and he makes them hear. He hangs out with children and with women and with prostitutes and with tax collectors. And they're even in his inner circle. Right? Because Jesus is reaching out and he is gathering up this great big band of misfits. Welcome to the circus. Right? And you and I, we have an opportunity when we strap on the imagery that God has created us in to say, this is me. Right? Look out, because here I come. God has made me, and I am who I'm meant to be. And so what will we do with that? You see, Jesus knew what it was like to be rejected. We could go to Matthew chapter 13. He goes back to his hometown of Nazareth and he begins to preach, and the people are ridiculing him. Like, they don't believe him at all. They're not buying this, that he's this Messiah, Son of God thing, right? And so he's removed, he's rejected, he is marginalized by his own people. And what happens when he goes about the ministry? Where's his biggest struggle at? It's with the Jewish people, right? The church, the leaders in the church, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he's marginalized by the leaders in the church. All these people that should have his back, and they don't. And then one day Jesus, he's turned over to Pontius Pilate. He's hung, crucified on a cross. Right? Where are his disciples at? Right? 12 guys he's hand selected to follow him for 3 years. Where are they at? They're not there. Because in his darkest moment, everybody left him. And you and I, like Peter would say, oh, not me, I wouldn't do that. But we do. Every time we sin, we do that. Every time we sin, we bail on Jesus and we leave him in the margins. The exact place that you and I don't want to be. And that's what was happening with P.T. Barnum. He was chasing after those in the margins so that he could fill his own void. And in that effort, he was doing exactly to other people the way that he felt when he was trapped in poverty. And so here's what I think is your next step. Right? Jesus reached out to the marginalized. Who is it in your life that you've marginalized? Who, based upon their income, based upon their race, based upon their gender, based upon their sin issue and not yours, obviously, right? Have you marginalized? And you've put them aside and you've said, I want to be a child of God, but you don't deserve to be a child of God. Right? That person. Because Jesus loves that person. That person you don't want to touch, that person you don't want to talk to, that person that you have placed in the margin. Right? Those are the people we need to reach. The good news for you is this. That Jesus reaches into your margin. And he gives you significance. And he gives you purpose. And he accepts you just the way you are. Right? So maybe you need to give your life to Christ. Be a part of this merry band of misfits. But maybe you need to go out and share the love of Christ to some others just like you.